on the world today. China blames the United States for the UK's Huawei 5G ban. India's monsoon season leaves havoc and deaths. Plus, the World Health Organization warns a significant number of children are missing out on vaccines. Well, welcome to the program today. I'm Amarachi Hubani. We're beginning today with stories that have been grabbing the headlines. China responding to the United States and the UK over the ban of Huawei 5G network. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced on Tuesday the UK will stop purchasing Huawei 5G equipment from the end of this year. Will stop using all Huawei 5G equipment by 2027. China says it believes that decision was made under the influence of the U.S. government. President Trump, specifically, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying, said this in response to the U.S. President Donald Trump saying he convinced many countries not to use Huawei if they want to do business with the United States. He also made the comment after the UK announced that decision on Tuesday. Huawei has urged the British government to rescind the ban on its 5G network. Chinese officials have continued to comment on the UK's decision. The Chinese ambassador to the UK, Liu Xiaoming, told the Centre for European Reform that the UK's decision was disheartening and would further hurt investment. He said the Chinese businesses had seen how the telecoms giant was dumped, so confidence in further investment would be difficult.
The disappointing and wrong decision on Huawei. Now, I would even say it's not only disappointing, it's a disheartening. You know, when you see this company, good company who have been here for 20 years, they, not only invested 2 billion in this country, created 28,000 jobs, and pay the tax and contribute greatly to the telecom industry of this country and to the local community. That you simply dump this country, use British media's word, purge this country. You know, it's very disheartening, and among the businesses.
We did mention earlier the U.S. president bragged about convincing other countries not to take the Huawei deal. President Trump, during a briefing at the White House's Rose Garden on Tuesday, also said his administration holds China fully responsible for concealing the coronavirus and unleashing it upon the world.
No administration has been tougher on China than this administration. We imposed historic tariffs. We stood up to China's intellectual property theft at a level that nobody's ever come close. We confronted untrustworthy Chinese technology and telecom providers. We convinced many countries, and I did this myself for the most part, not to use Huawei because we think it's an unsafe security risk. It's a big security risk. I talked many countries out of using it. If they want to do business with us, they can't use it. Just today, I believe that UK announced that they're not going to be using it.
The U.S. President Donald Trump there. Now, Channels Television's London correspondent Juliana Olaika joins us now from London for the reactions from that area. Juliana, great to see you. China seems to think the UK's decision is being done under the influence of the U.S. government. We just heard President Donald Trump, bragging about convincing other countries not to take in Huawei. Is there any truth to this? Is there a relationship between... is there any correlation between the UK government's decision, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing that to Parliament yesterday, and President Donald Trump, what he's saying about him convincing governments around the world not to allow Huawei 5G network in their countries?
Well, Amarachi, what President Donald Trump was saying in the lawn of the White House garden is pretty true. He has been one of the most vocal leaders across the world trying to convince government not to take on Huawei's 5G network, particularly the Five Eyes grouping, which is a digital grouping between Canada, America, New Zealand, Australia and Britain, which is why it's such a delicate balancing act for the UK. And they were pretty clear yesterday, the Digital Secretary Oliver Dowden, when he was delivering the statement in the House of Commons, that the reason the government are doing a pretty shocking, controversial U-turn on the agreement that they had with Huawei is because of a technical reason. There are some components, as we know. America have put several sanctions on Huawei equipment. And what the British government was saying is because of these sanctions, that Huawei would be no longer fit for purpose in the UK. So they were very clear on that. But of course, everybody knows that there was pressure from Donald Trump. There was pressure from the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He was here in Britain just before the pandemic took hold. And he was pretty clear when he spoke to reporters alongside his counterpart, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, that Huawei did impose a national security threat. And because Britain and America are allies, Pompeo said it would be very difficult for Britain to share intelligence with Britain if they did have Huawei. So there are so many issues at play here, but Britain are insisting that it had nothing to do with the geopolitical issue and had more to do with imagine because of COVID. He said that no truth to that matter, but whether or not that's convincing the Chinese government or Huawei is another matter.
And China says a lot of its investments would also be affected. We're talking about other Chinese companies who are in the UK trying to do business in the UK. How much of Chinese investments will be hit because of this decision taken by the UK and possibly other countries who will be taking a toll from the UK and from the US?
I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, Amarachi, but if I believe what you're saying is how this is going to affect British business or Chinese business doing business together, there will be consequences. We heard from the Chinese ambassador to Britain saying it wasn't that they were disappointed, they were disheartened, meaning, you know, they've taken this personally. In fact, the foreign minister in China went a little bit further and said there will be repercussions for this. And there have been some concerns from British businesses that do business in China. You know, Britain has been badly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We are going to be facing a recession that we haven't faced in about 300 years in this country. Mass unemployment, which currently stands at about 3.9%, is likely to rise to 13% when the government's furlough scheme, so basically when they stop paying people's wages, comes to an end. On top of that, Amarachi, what Britain has is Brexit. We're already having problems with Brussels. Downing Street and Brussels haven't managed to come to an agreement of very clear decisions. And so Britain have been very open in saying that they are hoping post-Brexit that they will have a free trade agreement with China. And that clearly hangs in the balance. And there's no denying that China will one day be the world's largest economy. But how they choose to do business with Britain is going to be on how this matter of Huawei is going to be resolved. In fact, China is still very hopeful that Britain may indeed do another U-turn on this and will change their decision. You know, they've said 2027, which is a long time. And even the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said it's too long. So perhaps within that time, you know, somebody could back down.
Indeed, Juliana, thanks again. And thanks again for your reporting. A lot to be ironed out in these issues and to see how this plays out in the next few days. Thanks again for joining us on the program. Let's switch now to India, where heavy flooding triggered by monsoon rains have forced more than 1 million people to flee their homes in Kaziranga state. It's also killed at least 50 people in the state of Assam. As many as 170 animals have been rescued from the state's national park, home to the world's largest concentration of one-horned rhinos. A female rhino calf that was separated from its mother was also rescued by authorities. With most of the land and the park underwater, animals are struggling to survive. The Brahmaputra River, one of the largest rivers in the world, which flows from Tibet into India and then into Bangladesh, bursted its banks in Assam over the weekend, inundating more than 2,000 villages. A younger, more defiant generation of Hong Kong Democrats has secured the most votes in unofficial primary elections in the Chinese-ruled city, setting the stage for a battle with pro-Beijing politicians for control of the city's legislature. The 16, all but one under 30 and dressed in black T-shirts, are members of a so-called localist or resistance camp which outshone the cohort of traditional Democrats and secured 12 candidate slots as at today. The success of young contenders in the primaries organized by the pro-democracy camp on the weekend to pick candidates for a September 6th election for a 70-seat city assembly comes amid widespread resentment of a national security law that Beijing imposed last month. A Hong Kong student studying in Sydney says although he is grateful for the Australian government's safe haven offers, is hopeful more help will be provided for protesters in the Chinese territory. Australia said last week it was suspending its extradition treaty with Hong Kong in response to the new security law imposed there and announced measures to attract businesses from the Asian financial hub, a provoking angry response from Beijing. And now to the coronavirus update, but the UN says a significant number of children are already missing out on life-saving vaccines. It's the first time it's happened in nearly 30 years, and it's all due to the coronavirus pandemic right now. The World Body has identified what it calls a substantial drop in the immunization of children against diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough in the first 4 months of 2020. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical company Moderna says it will be entering the last stage of vaccine trial this month.
Moderna says its experimental vaccine for COVID-19 showed it was safe and provoked immune responses in all 45 healthy volunteers in the ongoing early stages of the study. No study volunteers experienced a serious side effect, but more than half reported mild or moderate reactions such as fatigue, headache, chills, muscle aches, or pain at the injection site. The company is the first to start human testing of a vaccine for the novel coronavirus on March 16th. Over in Russia, scientists have hailed the results of their first clinical trial of a potential coronavirus vaccine, saying it had proven safe and that volunteers had developed an immune response. 3 of the 18 volunteers monitored over a month at the Sechenov University said they all had experienced few side effects.
Prime Minister, not only are we getting on
in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson fiercely defended his government's preparation for a potential second spike of the pandemic during the Prime Minister's questions in Parliament today. He said the government was implementing the preparations for a potential second spike, but did not say whether all of the recommendations were being worked on.
Thanks to the hard work of the entire NHS, that we were able to prevent our health service from being overwhelmed.
The recommendations include greatly expanded test and trace infrastructure after the government's own system experienced multiple delays and subsequent criticism from opposition lawmakers.
To Yorkshire and visit Nuzshah.
In Spain, some 160,000 people in the region of Catalonia have gone back into confinement as authorities scramble to control a fresh surge of infections in the area. But just as a judge approved the regional government's stay-at-home order for residents of the Lleida area, 180 kilometers west of Barcelona, tensions rose over how to handle an increase in a suburb of the Catalan capital. And Belgium has postponed a further easing of rules on social gatherings after an uptick in the number of COVID-19 infections. And the Prime Minister says she cannot rule out the reintroduction of lockdowns in the areas worst affected. Finally, Hong Kong officials have advised residents to stay indoors after the city recorded its 9th COVID-19 related death. The new rules make face masks mandatory for people on public transport, and restaurants will no longer provide dine-in services and only offer takeaway after 6 p.m.
Stay with us on The World Today. Still ahead. When the Queen calls, Queen Elizabeth must have lifted spirits of British Armed Service when she held a video call with them, chatting about their life and their work. Stay with us. But what happens when you have too much of a good thing? Well, that's what some people in South Africa, those in Drakenstein Mountain, are seriously battling with. The country's biggest single wine exporter, Distel, is helping to battle that problem of plenty. Prestigious wines such as Nederberg are bottled at the vineyard in Paarl, just outside of Cape Town, and then shipped both locally and worldwide. However, keeping pace is also a problem because of the impact of an abundant harvest and the lockdown disruption that has led to a glut as sits maturing in French oak barrels or stored in metal vats at wine estates.
At first, it might not sound like a problem, but at the century's own vineyard overlooking South Africa's Drakenstein Mountains, they have got a lot of wine. Prestigious brands such as Nederberg are bottled at the vineyard in Paarl, just outside Cape Town, to be shipped worldwide by major South African exporter, Distel. But amid an abundant harvest and global lockdown restrictions, the shipping can't keep pace, leading to a glut that sits maturing at wine estates.
It's a massive problem. It's a structural problem that could take at least 2 years to resolve. In short, about 240 million litres of excess wine is currently available in various forms in the Western Cape region. And
the company's CEO, Mr. Richard Voshton, says there's around 240 million litres of excess wine across the Western Cape, of which Distel accounts for 40 million.
We can reconnect now to Maria Burr to talk more about the vaccine that Moderna, the U.S. pharmaceutical company, is developing, which they say could be ready by 2022. Maria, what more do we know about the vaccine and the stage that Moderna is at?
Yes, thank you. This stage that it's at is at the human trial phase, which means it's very far along, much further along than many of the other vaccines that the U.S. has been looking at. And so we looked at a study of about 45 people. It's very promising. The antibodies look to be able to build those up within the individual, allowing the novel coronavirus to then for individuals to not be able to contract it. And so it is clear that it looks like the Moderna has done a great job with being able to provide a potential vaccine. As you said, by 2022, many are hopeful that some of that can be escalated a little bit faster.
And Dr. Fauci, who has been at the forefront of the U.S. Coronavirus pandemic response, has said that a vaccine may not be ready as of next year. Or he'd said, beg your pardon, a few times that we could see a vaccine as early as January. But Moderna says this vaccine would most likely be ready in the next 2 or 3 years. Does that negate what Dr. Fauci has said so far?
It does in some ways, but I think the bigger piece now is that I think they're really focusing on ensuring that whatever vaccine is brought forth is one that'll be safe for children, one that'll be safe for adults, and obviously the most vulnerable populations. And so, and the question is, will it be available in some form prior to the general release? And that's really going to be up to the individuals, those in the FDA, to be able to see if this could be approved any earlier, especially for specific populations. And sometimes that is the case when you have these types of vaccines out there they're looking at to address a very chronic pandemic.
Maria, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And as we end the program, Britain's Queen Elizabeth held a conference call with members of the armed services to hear about their work, both at home and abroad. The Queen spoke with 3 different members of the armed forces who were stationed across the world. She heard the touching story of one of the servicemen on the call, Lieutenant Colonel Barry Terry, who is currently deployed to a UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. He has not seen his family since last year. She thanked them for their service in an effort to boost morale during these difficult times.
Deliver ground support for the helicopters, and I get them ready for flying stations, and this involves moving the ship's tractor, moving the helicopters onto their spots.
Sounds as though you're rather busy.
I definitely am, ma'am.
I've been out here for Christmas, Easter and the summer, and I'm aiming to go back towards the end of August.
And you haven't seen your family since then?
No, Mum. No, unfortunately, the COVID crisis has meant that the rest and recuperation flights have been put on hold.
So how do you train?
During the lockdown, unfortunately, with all the gyms and everything closed, we had to sort of resort to unorthodox sort of training methods. So I've been pushing a car up and down the street. I've had to make a gym.
Well, I suppose that's one way to train.
Yeah, so that's definitely one way to train, Mum.
Very interesting to hear about all those deployments. And obviously everybody's been extremely busy with the pandemic, haven't they? And doing a wonderful job. Well, I'm very glad to have been able to meet all of you, and the best of luck.
I don't know about you, but something warms my heart about this conversation. It almost feels like talking to your own grandmother. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.